gone over the medications for IVF. What about medications used for IUI? These are typically ovulation induction medications like Clomid and Letrozole. I'm Dr. Jessica Reinig. I'm a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialist, and I am going to talk about how Clomid and Letrozole work today. So back to the drawing board, and you'll remember these are the hormones of the menstrual cycle, which really come from the brain and the ovaries in general. And the way that Letrozole and Clomid works is by messing with or manipulating the communication between the brain and the ovaries. So just to review that really quickly, you have the brain, and in the brain there's two parts, the hypothalamus and pituitary, that are involved in this process. So the hypothalamus makes GnRH, or gonadotropin releasing hormone, and that goes down to the pituitary to tell the pituitary to release gonadotropins like FSH and LH. These two hormones then go on to act on the ovaries. The FSH mainly drives the ovaries to make and grow a follicle, and that is going to get the follicles and the cells supporting the eggs that are growing to release estrogen. And then the estrogen goes back up to the brain, and it turns off the pituitary and the hypothalamus so that we stop making those gonadotropins and we stop pushing egg development. Once it reaches a certain level for a certain length of time, it becomes excitatory to the pituitary, and that makes LH release, and that goes down to the ovaries that then spit out an egg. So let's talk about the two commonly used oral ovulation medications, Clomid and Letrozole. Both of these hormones basically trick the brain into thinking that there's no estrogen, and so it pushes through this process so that the ovaries are stimulated more than that they are naturally or without medication. The way that they do it, though, is a little bit different. Clomid works in the brain by binding to estrogen receptors in the hypothalamus so that this process cannot happen. So the brain is not seeing the estrogen coming up to feed it, therefore more GnRH is released, more FSH and LH is released, and that stimulates the ovaries to push out more follicular growth and then estrogen and eventually to ovulate. So you have the estrogen receptors blocked, that leads to increased gonadotropin releasing hormone, which leads to increased gonadotropins, and that goes down to the ovaries, which grow an egg, release estrogen, and eventually release an egg. Letrozole, on the other hand, works outside of the brain, and what it does is it decreases an enzyme that is important in making estrogen, and so the actual levels of estrogen in the body decrease. When that happens, we still don't get that negative feedback, and that makes the GnRH increase, the FSH and LH increase, and that goes down to the ovaries to make more estrogen as they're growing an egg and eventually release an egg. So by blocking estrogen forming itself, there's no negative feedback that goes to the brain. You have increased gonadotropin releasing hormone, which leads to increased FSH, and that brings you to grow and mature an egg, make estrogen, and eventually ovulate.